Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host, Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's great to be joined by a friend, Trish Butler, a marketing leader who has dedicated a career not only to building brands, but to accelerating growth. And I know that's something our audience around the world is interested in. A background that includes senior roles, a lot of marketing experience in companies such as the Taxback Group as the group CMO, and also experience working with very well-known brands such as B&Q, which is owned by Kingfisher, Screwfix, and McCann. Trish brings deep expertise to this discussion when it comes to things like brand strategy, digital transformation that we all seem to be constantly going through, and of course, leading teams and marketing teams across many diverse industries. I got to say, Trish is also passionate about culture, innovation, and of course, strategy. So this should be a really interesting discussion about how we can all start to think about driving not just growth for growth's sake, but sustainable growth. So Trish, you're very welcome to VistaTalks. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Simon. It's great to be in touch again and get to have a chance to talk about all things marketing again.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. So look, let's jump straight in because we've got a lot to cover. I mentioned that you are helping build brands and also you're building marketing functions for these high growth companies. Mm-hmm. How does that differ from maybe some of your prior roles where you were leading senior marketing roles, CMOs in these big companies? What unique value are you bringing to the clients now when they're saying to you, hey, Trish, how do we build this function? How do we actually fuel this growth machine that we're on? How are you going about that? What are you finding are the main differences, Trish?
Yeah, it's such an interesting space to be in. So for me, I think the biggest difference between them both is speed and focus. So when you're full time in a single company, you have the luxury of, building relationships, getting involved in projects and conversations that maybe you're not directly related to in terms of your team's KPIs, and you're working on building medium to long-term solutions. But I've found the past 18 months working with many high growth startups to be some of the most rewarding yet. So I've worked with a luxury retailer, a data strategy consultancy, and a number of AI startups too. And the variety is fantastic and it's incredibly rewarding. And it really helps from a creative and innovative thinking perspective to have such a broad spectrum of industries to pull from. But really, I suppose, to answer your question from a marketing perspective, your focus is really around a few key areas, especially in those, early stage AI startups. Establishing product market fit is a big focus because they're looking to secure investment. You really focus on getting enough customers using your solution or service to show that there's a market there to actually go after. So that's obviously not an issue really for an established brand and an established business. So market research really is your main focus, getting in front of statistically significant pool of potential customers to understand their needs and their challenges and really understand their language, and using that then to move on to the next bit, which is establishing a really solid value proposition and story. Because in this world of AI tools popping up left, right, and center, you're really trying to create a really strong, simple pitch to sell to everyone that you see. And then from a team perspective, you're looking at a different kind of skill set. You're looking at all rounders who can turn their hand to anything. You're encouraging trial and error. I always love to hire interns who are really ambitious and driven and not afraid to make mistakes. Because, as Mark Zuckerberg used to say, done is better than perfect. You just need to get out in the market and get some feedback. So yeah, and I think really from a client's perspective, my value would come from being the devil's advocate, and helping them understand that really nobody cares. Nobody actually cares about who they are or what they have to sell or what they have to offer. But what is important is getting to the heart of the customer need and developing that into a compelling story that they can bring to market and commercialize. So the challenge is always the same. Like, it's understanding the market, understanding the customer need, and helping articulate how the brand is better than the next alternative. That's what filters down into everything. And if you get that right from the start, everything flows more easily from there.
Yeah, I love that. And that flicking of the switch, if I can sort of term it that way, between nobody cares, right?
Yeah,
And what problem are you solving for me? Right.
yeah,
So that's a great thing. And I also just you mentioned there as well, championing sort of interns, and
yeah,
that's interesting because we're all bombarded with AI news, right? Constantly.
yeah,
And it's taken away all these entry level jobs and they won't exist, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas you're finding great success at working with interns and people that want to do that kind of work. So thanks for throwing some sort of thinking around what it's like working for these very fast, high growth companies where
yeah,
they're trying to do it at a breakneck speed. And yet they've got to get some of the basics right. What are you trying to solve for a customer? How does this make the customer improve, go better, solve their problems? And I
yeah,
want to compare that, if I can, to my next question around. I mentioned at the start you were the group CMO at Taxback Group, which is
yeah.
it's a huge successful company, and
Mm.
you've obviously had experience and exposure, I suppose, to working with multiple brands and services under that one sort of umbrella of
Yeah,
the Taxback Group. And I think as a CMO and your experience there, I'd be keen to see any lessons you'd have or any insights you've got about managing brand and
mm,
maintaining that consistency across different markets, which may not be in the same country, may not speak the same
yeah.
language, but also could you maybe share with our audience any of those sort of insights or experiences of managing at a group level when you've got multiple things under that one umbrella, Trish? Just to
Yeah.
contrast it with what we've talked about initially.
Yeah, so Taxback Group have now rebranded to CluneTech. So they've gone through a rebrand in the last couple of years, but there was 8 different brands under the Taxback Group umbrella. In terms of managing those, like each one of those brands had their own unique offering, but they were all kind of, aligned in terms of the group values and the vision and the mission for overall for Taxback Group, which is to make tax simple and to help people, be as tax efficient as they could. We had a group chief people officer who I worked really closely with, Paul Herrick. He was brilliant. So it was really important that from a values perspective, goals perspective, they were communicated really clearly across the group. We rolled out WorkVivo, the employee communications platform. So that was really key in terms of keeping people up to date on what was happening where. We also had a kind of group shared services function. It is a group an internal design team. So that we had a team of about 20 designers over in Varna in Bulgaria who did most of the creative work for us. So they were like our in-house agency. So for me, my job was around, internal comms in terms of and employee engagement in terms of values and goals and how we were measuring up against our targets for the year. It was also around upskilling the internal teams. So we held a number of internal, digital master classes where we got speakers over from Iceland, from other parts of Scandinavia, from Google, LinkedIn, Meta. They all came in because really, what you're trying to do is enable the teams in order to be able to make decisions for themselves, but they have that kind of reference tool or brand book to come back to make sure that things were kind of on track. So and then did a lot of encouraging of the different marketing teams to speak to each other and learn from each other because everybody did things slightly differently. So my job was to try and kind of help raise the standards also everyone was able to help each other and learn from each other as well.
Yeah, it sounds like one heck of a journey, 8 different
Yeah,
brands under one umbrella group. And as you say,
yeah,
they've rebranded since as well.
yeah,
But working across many different markets. I like bringing in those sort of companies from, as you mentioned, Scandinavia and also the big sort of tech giants coming in as well to
yeah,
help enable people So important. And let's not forget about the other brands that I mentioned at the start. So B&Q,
Yeah,
Screwfix, which I think is close to your heart too, and of
very,
course
yeah.
McCann. I mean, what insights could you also share with us about building brands that can scale effectively, I suppose, in those environments from both a B2B and a B2C world, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I love that you've asked me about them because B&Q and Screwfix were probably my favorite jobs, favorite companies I've ever worked for. Probably because my dad was a builder, so I spent a lot of time on building sites growing up. But they're like two companies where the customer really is the heart of all the decision making and the business strategy. Um, and I think, about, scaling brands effectively. For me, there the learnings there around what good management looks like. There was, number one, clear goals. Once the goals have been established by the business, it's really important to simplify them as much as possible and then over communicate them in every different channel, in every different medium, whether it's email, it's the intranet, it's posters and the toilets, it's, town halls, it's off-sites together. But those goals are over communicated again and again and again. So everybody's really, really clear about, where we're all going to. The second one then would be around ownership and accountability. So that was again up on posters everywhere in the company. Now that everyone knows who's responsible for the goals and the delivery of them, it's really important to be kept accountable. So whether you're using a RACI matrix or another version of that, it's something that people need to work hard at to adopt to be able to really rely on each other so that there's proper teamwork going on and everyone can depend on everyone else to do their part. Um, Obviously that doesn't come without its challenges. So that's where, open discussion, communication is really important because racy it can become a bit of a blame game. So, I've seen it in different organizations where people, they're either ganging up on one team that's falling short and, they're kicked then when they're down, and that's not helpful for anybody. It takes the whole team to build a brand and scale effectively. And so being open and honest with each other and supporting each other and helping people when they need it is really, really important. I suppose that would bring me on to my last point, fun. Like for me, the brands that I've built and worked on that have scaled most successfully have been the ones where we've had fun doing it. So we had really good relationships where you could call each other out when things weren't going well, but also have a laugh and a joke while you were working together. I mean, you spend so much time, so much of your life with your colleagues. If it's not fun, I'd highly recommend that you move jobs and go to a different team or a different organization because if you don't enjoy going to work every day, or well, okay, every day is probably a bit unrealistic, but if you don't enjoy going to work most days, then you're not in the right job, and I'd highly recommend you go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think fun is so important. And we were talking a little bit off camera before we started recording this episode. And we were talking a little bit about the hamster wheel, weren't we? And how busy
Yeah,
we all get. And we're all buried into screens constantly. And yet,
yeah,
sometimes that human trait is so important that you've got to enjoy what you do and you've got to bring
yeah.
some fun into it, particularly if you're trying to build a brand internationally, right? So important.
Oh, absolutely. Because, you have to be able to have a laugh with people. I think that goes back again to, my dad being a builder and builders on sites having a laugh and, the glass hammer and, getting the apprentice to
The tartan paint and the long
yeah, all
wait
that
and
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
all that
Yeah, like
stuff.
you have
Yeah,
to have
yeah,
that.
very good.
Like, so
All right. Well, what I like about our conversation so far is we started off talking about fast, high growth, global opportunities with these kind of new startups, these AI companies that you're
mm,
working with. We've also talked about your experiences and insights working in a group with multiple brands under one umbrella. And we've also talked about, I suppose, the ones that you like, the B&Qs and the Screwfixes, and the insights that you've got there, and and bringing it back to fun as well. But
yeah,
what sort of rang true with me as you were talking them all through, it seems to keep coming back to communication. It comes back to
yeah,
language. It comes back to, and particularly with your background with all the different entities, because they're all in different countries. They might speak different
Yeah.
languages. And that communication, whether it was the posters, the internal comms, the events, the meetings,
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of content, copy, communications that happen internally in large organizations
Yeah.
that have to resonate with that local audience and that local culture. So thanks for giving us those kind of three views. And it really sort of syncs up with what I want to talk about, because we have to talk about AI at some stage. Everybody's
Yeah.
talking about it. But I want to ask you, because I know you've got some interesting takes on AI, because the landscape of building a global brand and the landscape of communicating within a global brand, it's changing significantly, isn't it? The marketing landscape is changing significantly. The digital platforms, the social channels, it's changing how we think, it's changing how we act, it's changing how we potentially connect with these customers.
Mm.
Are there some trends that you're excited about? Are there some things that you're saying, look, I think we need to be more mindful of this?
Mm.
And how are you helping your clients maybe leverage AI, but also balancing it with the human elements that seem to be more important now than ever, like fun?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could talk all week about this one topic alone, but I'm kind of a little bit tired of listening to people talking about AI as well. For me, I suppose, one of the things, and when I worked agency side, you'd as an account handler, a lot of time was spent on, note taking, on, contact reports, on minutes, on status reports and updates and things like that. So for me, like one of the things I'm most excited about with AI is their ability to reduce all of that admin that has seeped its way into marketing and advertising over the last 15 years. So, that should be freeing people up to do deeper, more creative work and creative thinking. Um, on the other end of the spectrum, the ability to create a brand and a visual identity from scratch with zero budget is unbelievable. So I had a client who came to me at the start of the year who, had the opportunity to buy lease a kiosk in New York in the financial district, and he wanted to have a kind of confectionery brand. So between a couple of conversations, we decided to come up with like a Krispy Kreme alternative brand. So I used ChatGPT, Canva, Fiverr, Placeit, a number, and Perplexity to come up with a brand in about 3 days. And like I just couldn't believe it. So in the past, I would have looked for a graphic designer, a copywriter, and an art worker to help me kind of pull everything together. And me, with my minimal skills when it comes to design, I was able to do all of that in the space of a couple of days. Now he didn't have any budget at all, but if you have the marketing theory and strategy and thinking behind in like, if you have that knowledge, these tools are immensely powerful at being able to get an idea off the ground and get it out there when your client has like little to no budget. So I mean, that is amazing. I mean, I remember years ago when we were in McCann or another agency, and we charged like 10, 15 grand to do a HTML email. I mean, those days are well and truly gone. And like, it's a difficult time if you're an agency. How do you make money now? And it's not going to be on production of things. It's going to be on the creative thinking, on strategic consultancy, on, being that safe haven really for clients to be able to, get everything off their chest, because being a CMO is a difficult, very difficult job these days. It's a lonely place, and everybody thinks that your team can be replaced with like 5 AI tools, and that's just shows the lack of knowledge and education that there is around marketing outside the marketing team. So yeah, I think my main concern is that, we become an industry of tool users, unable to question or think for ourselves. So marketing is about questioning the norm, influencing people's attitudes and behaviors, the psychology of why we do what we do. And to do that, you need less time behind a screen and more time in front of your target audience. And I hope that that's what AI will allow us to do more of, and not just, typing everything into ChatGPT, getting it to do the thinking for us.
Yeah, it's a really great point. You know, I look, I love what AI has brought, but I'm a strong proponent of what a human working with AI can do.
Yeah.
Not at this moment in time what AI can do on its own. And I think you're right to flag that those sort of key critical skills are what actually makes things move in the right direction. It's not
Mm.
just producing stuff for the sake of it or just because you can do it a little bit faster. It's
Yeah.
aligning that. And I want to talk a little bit more about alignment next, if I can, Trish, with
Yeah.
you, because when we talk about things like culture, when we talk about things
Yeah.
like getting employees engaged, when you've mentioned things like internal communication, you know, across languages and cultures and countries, they're key pillars of I suppose, marketing philosophy, if we want to look at it
Mhm.
that way. And how do you go about, or how have you gone about it in the past when you're trying to ensure that the culture, the marketing, the growth plan, they're all actually aligned to get back to that sustainable growth that we started talking about today? Have you got any sort of takeaways or thoughts on that sort of alignment?
Yeah. I think, where this all kind of started to come to life for me really was when I worked at Immedis. So Immedis was a part of Taxback Group. And when I joined, there was 12 people. And when I left, there was 280. And that was over the space of 3 years. So rapid growth in a very short space of time. And it was a really exciting place to work. It was a really fun place to work, but everybody worked really, really hard. And at times, back in the days before COVID and we were all in the office, you'd be making a cup of tea in the kitchen and you realize some of your, people are a bit stressed and you realize, oh God, everyone's working so, so hard. And sometimes when everybody's working really hard, you can forget like, well, why are we working so hard? So that for me kicked off my obsession with internal communications, employee engagement, and culture. I remember sitting down with the CEO at the time, and saying to him, "Look, right, well, like I know I've got these key strategic projects on. What are all of the key strategic projects that everybody's working on across the business, and let's kind of sat down with an A3 notepad, sketched everything out, and realized that there were about five key strategic projects happening across the business, and everybody's working really hard, dedicated to that, but weren't really sure how the progress was being made. So we sat down, we created a simple one-page plan on the strategic goals for the next 3 years, put a pen to paper and started to use that as the foundation for our internal communication strategy. Brands are built from the inside out. Richard Branson's quote, you look after your people and they'll look after your customers and the business grows. That's what it all is. Whatever you're selling, it's ultimately you're in the people business. You have to be working towards a common goal or a philosophy or mission. And if people aren't clear on their goals and KPIs, that hard work can sometimes feel like a slog and not like actually it's all for something. So culture is something that everybody's responsible for, whether it's calling someone's bad behavior out or having a clear career path for everybody in the organization so they know that this hard work is going to get me to that next step and the step after that. So I think it's really important that marketing and HR are obviously completely aligned, but clarity on values, goals, and career paths are, I think, the cornerstones of that. Just having a good internal comms platform as well, like WorkVivo, for example, to keep people updated, really, really helps as well.
Yeah, thanks, Trish. That's very, very helpful. I'm thinking about a lot of the large global companies that we work with. I know you've worked with and
Yeah.
continue to do so. There's always a new. You mentioned the different. So you use an example there. Sorry about the five sort of strategies that were going on, for example. But
Mhm.
big companies, they tend to have strategies all the time in various functions, various
Yeah.
departments, various parts of the world. And I want to ask you about the go-to-market element of those strategies, because I'd be keen to see what are your sort of thoughts around some of the key elements that make a difference between a successful go-to-market strategy and maybe one that sounds like a good idea, but then struggles to deliver the results. And I'm asking that because an existing company doing, hundreds of millions or even billions in global revenue, they come out with a new product or service and they've got to ship that suddenly into, whether it's across Europe or into other parts of the world. They need that go-to-market piece to really work. And some we see succeed fantastically, and some we see falter a little bit and then get traction, and some just fail. So
Yeah.
what do you think are some of the key elements that make that differentiator between what works and what doesn't there, Trish? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit of repetition of what we talked about with B&Q and Screwfix. I think a successful go-to-market strategy is one that you're very clear on your ICP, so who your ideal client is. So a successful go-to-market strategy for me is one where you're really, really clear on your ICP. You know who your target market is, you know what their needs are, and you align everything to that. Because if you know who they are and what their needs are, you understand what channels that they are most likely to research your products or solutions in. So your media strategy is aligned with that. And with that, then you're allowing the business leeway to test and learn what works. I think often companies are looking for that magic bullet or the silver bullet to, okay, if we just put all of our money in here, then we'll see the leads increase by 50%, and put $1 in, we'll get $2 back, the private equity VC kind of methodology. But it's not that simple and it's not that straightforward. And if it was, then we'd be all doing it, and there'd be no innovation and no change. So yeah, and obviously the other side of it, we all know that 95% of people are not in market ready to buy at any one point in time. So you've got to nurture them over time with your long and short term strategies. So yeah, so I think that's a successful GTM strategy. You're clear on your ICP, you allow leeway to test and learn what works. And the third thing is that everybody's very clear about their role and responsibility within that, and they stay in their own lane. Because where I've seen it break down and struggle is when people start dipping into other areas. So that definitely doesn't help, and that definitely kind of creates breakdowns in relationships. But I think there's a couple of other things where I've seen it struggle to deliver too. So, you know, details, overanalyzing the minute details. So I would say don't sweat the small stuff. It's really important, that you have your real-time analytics and your dashboards so that your KPIs are being measured and you can see what's working and not working. But getting bogged down in the detail and overanalyzing each specific lead, I think, is really unproductive. What's more important is the trends over time, and that you see what is influencing those trends and going in the right direction. But I think the other side of it, which is, we touched on before, and before we started the recording, was the pricing or delivery not being right. So, you have your go-to-market strategy all sewn up in terms of sales, marketing, and product. This is what we're going to market with. But pricing is kind of left till, well, we'll just wait till we get talking to them, and then that we'll see what we can get away with in some ways. But it's wildly out of sync with the expectations of the customer, and that that can cause major issues. And you have spent all of this time and money and resource on getting these people through the door, and then it all falls down. Or the other side of it, where delivery hasn't been brought along on go-to-market discussions. So you've got product sales and marketing being the holy trinity to help drive growth, but actually no one's really told the delivery team that they are the ones who have to deliver all of this. And they can't handle the volume once you turn up the go-to-market activity. So then you're ending up with disgruntled customers, high churn rates, and low employee morale, which ultimately impacts culture too. So it's not something, go-to-market is not something for product sales and marketing to worry about. It's something for the whole business. And yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
another area.
it's great insight. And I also liked what you said, Trish, about, the target audience for all these big companies around the world. Your buyers aren't necessarily in market the moment you want to say something, right? So that
Yeah.
nurturing effect is really important too. And that, I suppose, comes back to where the communications, the content, the
Mm.
copy that, whether it's in your local country where the head office is, or whether it's in one of your branch offices or one of
Yeah.
your other hubs around the world, where you're talking to people in different languages, with different cultures, with different communication styles, with ads that resonate, but also nurturing different customer types around the
Yeah.
world, right? Because they're not all ready to buy the minute you want to sell something. I think that's such an
No.
important point. Thank you. And look, you've led teams of all different shapes and sizes for some of the biggest brands in the world, and also you've worked with some of these high-powered, funded startups in the AI space too. When it comes to working across those different countries, industries, working with teams that need to collaborate, whether it's with language or audiences, and the hybrid element now. Some people are never in the office, some people are in a couple of days a week. um, People are working more internationally now. They've got teams all over the world. They're quite dispersed. Any
Mm.
sort of thoughts on how you build for success in that environment, Trish?
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, it definitely, it makes things more colorful, definitely, to have teams across different countries and cultures. And I think as a leader, it's your responsibility to do your homework and educate yourself on different cultures and different countries, different languages, religions, and understand that, I mean, if you're in a leadership position, a caretaker role where you have people who look to you for guidance and direction, it's absolutely your responsibility to understand them as individuals. Um, you know, uh, I think that then is backed up by what we talked about earlier, a really clear strategy, really clear goals and communication of that. I think that you need to get your feet on the ground in local markets and understand what it's like in those countries. Cultural nuances and differences are very hard to pick up when you're, doing everything digitally. If you're in retail, you walk the floors of the store in that country, you just earwig and listen to what people are saying. You learn languages. I mean, it's a privilege to work in a role where you get to operate in different countries. And so, you need to educate yourself and not just assume that everything translates back to English really neatly. I worked for Siemens after I finished university, and I worked in the head office in Munich. And even though I did German throughout school and university, I didn't become fluent until I worked for Siemens. And at one stage then I remember, a colleague, we were out for dinner and we were talking about stuff, and I realized what she had said. I responded to, and we were chatting away. And then I realized afterwards I had no idea how to translate back to English what we had just been talking about. Now, obviously, it's not realistic to learn every single language in the world, but there's you have to make the effort to learn the language and the culture. I mean, that's really interesting. That's what makes your job interesting. That's what makes, life interesting, is different people and cultures. And so that's really important to do. having on a practical level, then having a country liaison for each country that's able to, look at work with you on plans to localize things, to keep things on brand, but obviously relevant for the local market is really, really important. And understanding, the different media works or doesn't work in certain countries as well. I had a great person who worked with me in Taxback Group and CluneTech, who, we had a great plan, but she said, well, okay, in Bulgaria, we don't really listen to that, or we do this instead. And so it's a two-way collaboration, really.
Yeah, I like that. There's a lot of learning and also responsibility for leaders in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Trish.
Yeah.
Look, we've packed so much into our conversation today. We could keep talking for hours, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you to leave us with some thoughts, maybe a takeaway. And
Yeah.
obviously, for leaders and people who are looking to build their brand more successfully, they're looking to accelerate that growth, maybe internationally. What's
Yeah.
the advice you want to leave us with to get us thinking about that?
I think keep things simple and focused. The danger can be to try and do too many things at once, and that's where people fall down. I think also, think big, like, the sky is the limit. But you need to provide clarity on what your brand stands for and how you communicate that, how your team knows how to communicate that, and be consistent with your team, with the business, with your CEO, with your customers. You don't need to rebrand, reposition, and complicate messaging, trying to get into the detail of things. That comes later in the sales process. So really, simplicity, clarity, and consistency help build brands and reputations, and just make sure to deliver on your promise every time.
That's a great takeaway. Thank you, Trish. And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time together today on this episode
Yeah.
of VistaTalks. I want to ask our international audience, whether they're watching or listening around the world, to maybe tune in again, to catch up with the VistaTalks show, to follow us on social media, do everything we need you to do to help support the show, share it with some of your colleagues. And hopefully you'll join me back here for some more interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world, just like Trish. But Trish, thanks for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure to catch up today, and thanks for sharing so many insights today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks very much, Simon. I've loved every minute.